She believed she was in charge. She thought she could decide who was worthy of respect. But in just one flight, one small mistake, she lost everything. A flight attendant denied a woman a simple cup of water, never realizing she had just disrespected the most powerful person on the plane. By the time they landed, her entire career was over. Before we begin, comment below where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Evelyn Brooks sat comfortably in her first-class seat, adjusting the silk scarf around her neck as she reached for the in-flight menu. The plane was nearly full, and the quiet murmur of passengers settling in filled the cabin. She wasn't in a hurry. Flying was second nature to her now, just another destination, another business deal to finalize. She had long understood that patience was the key to success. Meanwhile, Samantha Hayes moved swiftly down the aisle, her steps sharp and practiced. Every motion was deliberate, her uniform pristine, her posture straight. She radiated authority, the kind that made it clear she expected to be obeyed. When she reached first class, her smile widened, her tone softened, polished, professional. She leaned in to offer champagne to a man in a tailored suit, laughing lightly at something he said before smoothly moving to the next seat. Every passenger was treated like royalty, until she saw Evelyn. Her smile faltered, just slightly, just enough. No greeting, no polite pleasantries, just a pause, long enough to make it clear something was off. Then, instead of offering a drink, Samantha simply nodded and moved on, acting as if Evelyn wasn't even there. Evelyn noticed, but she wasn't surprised. It had happened before. She recognized the look, the hesitation, the unspoken question in the flight attendant's eyes. Does she really belong here? Did she actually buy this seat? Evelyn had seen it too many times to count. She didn't react. No frown, no demand for attention. She simply waited. Minutes passed. Samantha continued her work, still treating first-class passengers with warmth and charm, at least the ones she deemed deserving of it. Evelyn finally lifted her head and spoke, her voice calm and polite. "Excuse me, may I have a cup of water?" The request was simple, nothing excessive, just water. Samantha barely glanced at her, letting out a soft sigh, the kind that suggested she was being asked for something unreasonable. "Water is for economy," she replied, her tone clipped. "We serve champagne or juice in first class." Evelyn blinked, her expression unreadable. "I just want water." Samantha shifted her weight, arms crossing, her irritation barely hidden. "You're in first class, ma'am. We don't serve plain water here unless it's bottled, and that's reserved for priority guests." She scribbled something on her notepad before looking up again. "Would you like something else?" Evelyn tilted her head slightly, her face still composed. "So you're saying I can't have a cup of water?" Samantha shrugged. "I'm saying we have a menu. First-class service is for premium passengers." For the first time, Evelyn smiled. Not warm, not amused, just a small, knowing curve of her lips. "And I don't qualify as a premium passenger?" Samantha hesitated. For a brief second, she realized she had said too much. Nearby, a few passengers had started to take notice. They weren't staring, but they were listening, their gazes flickering between the two women. This was the moment. Samantha could have corrected herself. She could have walked away. She could have said, "My mistake." Instead, she doubled down. "If you can afford this seat," she said, her voice quieter now, "I'm sure you can afford to buy a bottle of water when we land." The hush that spread through first class was small, but noticeable. Evelyn didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She simply reached for her phone, tapped the screen a few times, then set it down on the armrest. Then she waited. Samantha turned away, posture stiff, as if she had ended the conversation. She resumed her duties, her voice light and cheerful as she served other passengers, as if nothing had happened. Evelyn remained still, her fingers tapping lightly against the armrest. She had encountered people like Samantha before, people who mistook a uniform for real power. She had learned long ago that true power doesn't need to be displayed, it simply exists. In the galley, a younger flight attendant named Julia Reed had witnessed the exchange. Julia had been working under Samantha for a year now. She had seen how she operated, treating first-class passengers like VIPs, but only the ones she personally deemed worthy. Julia knew Evelyn had asked for nothing but a simple cup of water, and yet Samantha had gone out of her way to deny her. Julia hesitated, glancing at the chilled bottles of water stocked in the galley. Taking a quiet breath, she picked one up and walked over to Evelyn's seat. "Here you go, ma'am," Julia said softly, setting the bottle on Evelyn's tray table. "Let me know if you need anything else." Evelyn looked up at Julia, her expression unreadable. No words were needed. No dramatic response. She simply nodded. Julia smiled politely and stepped away. But Samantha saw. From the corner of her eye, she spotted Julia handing the water to Evelyn. A flash of irritation crossed her face. Her jaw tightened. Then, with sharp, clicking steps, she stormed back toward Julia. "What do you think you're doing?" Samantha hissed under her breath. Julia's face stiffened. "She asked for water." Samantha's eyes narrowed. "And I already told her we don't serve it." Julia stood her ground. "It's just water." Her voice was steady, but her hands gripped the counter. "I didn't think it was a big deal." Samantha leaned in, lowering her voice even further. "We have rules, Julia. You don't get to decide who gets what." Julia hesitated. She had worked hard for this job. She had followed every protocol. But there was something deeply wrong about what Samantha was saying. "It's not about the rules, is it?" Julia asked, her voice quiet but firm. "You just didn't want her to have it." Samantha's jaw tightened. "Stay in your place, Julia." Julia didn't argue, but she didn't back down either. And Samantha had no idea just how badly she had messed up. Julia knew arguing with Samantha was useless. She had learned long ago that once Samantha made a decision, she never backed down, even if she was wrong. With a small nod, Julia stepped back, letting the conversation die, but the damage had already been done. Samantha turned abruptly, marching past Evelyn's seat without a second glance. But Evelyn wasn't watching her anymore. Instead, she reached for the bottle of water, twisting the cap open effortlessly. She took a small sip, placed the bottle back on the tray table, and returned to her phone as if the entire exchange had never even happened. But something had changed. Samantha didn't realize it yet, but the moment she turned a simple request into a fight, she had already lost. Samantha returned to her duties, but something was off. The irritation burned in her chest, refusing to settle. She had always prided herself on control, maintaining the perfect atmosphere in first class. Everything had to be efficient, polished, and most importantly, by her standards. But Julia had defied her. And worse, the woman in 1A, the woman who should have been embarrassed, should have reacted, should have demanded a manager, had done nothing. She had just sat there, unbothered, untouched, completely at ease. Samantha stole a glance at her. Not a smirk, not a triumphant look, not even satisfaction. Evelyn was simply scrolling through her phone, tapping idly at the screen as if Samantha didn't exist at all. And somehow, that was worse than any reaction she could have had. Samantha squared her shoulders, forcing her mind back to work. She needed to take control again. If Evelyn thought she could undermine her authority, she had another thing coming. The flight attendants had begun preparing for meal service. Samantha moved swiftly, her charm fully restored as she took orders from the other first-class passengers. She flashed warm smiles. She spoke in soft, polished tones. She acted as though nothing had happened. But when she reached 1A, everything changed. Her voice cooled, her eyes hardened, her warmth disappeared. "For dinner, we're serving lobster risotto and filet mignon," Samantha said smoothly. But then, her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Though I assume you'd prefer something simpler." Evelyn lifted her gaze slowly, her dark eyes locking onto Samantha's. "And why would you assume that?" A flicker of hesitation crossed Samantha's face, but she covered it quickly. "You just seem more comfortable with basic options." For a moment, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Nearby passengers subtly shifted, pretending not to listen, but their eyes lingered just a little too long. From the galley, Julia stood frozen, her expression tense as she watched the moment unfold. Evelyn didn't react, not the way Samantha wanted her to. She didn't get offended, didn't raise her voice, didn't argue. Instead, she simply set her phone down, tapped her fingers lightly against the armrest, and said, "The filet mignon is fine." Samantha forced a polite nod, scribbling the order onto her notepad. But before she could turn away, Evelyn's voice cut through the air. "Tell me," she said, tilting her head slightly, "do you treat all your first-class passengers this way, or just the ones you assume don't belong?" Samantha stiffened. For the first time, she faltered. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her fingers tightened around the notepad. I treat all passengers according to airline policy, she forced out, keeping her tone neutral. Evelyn smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was knowing. Good to know, she said softly. Then she picked up her phone once more. Samantha turned sharply, walking away, her chest tight with frustration. But as she stepped back into the galley, her stomach twisted. Because this time, she had seen it. Right before Evelyn picked up her phone again, a message had flashed across the screen. And the name attached to it? It was a name Samantha recognized. Her pulse quickened. Her hands went cold. Because the name wasn't just familiar. It was impossible to ignore. It was the CEO of the airline. Samantha rushed back to the galley, her breath slightly uneven. She gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady herself, trying to rationalize what she had just seen. Maybe she misread it. Maybe it was someone else with the same name. Maybe it wasn't what she thought. But deep down she knew. Something was wrong. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to stay composed. No, this was nothing. She had dealt with entitled travelers before, people who thought they were more important than they were. Evelyn was just another one. She probably just sent a complaint to customer service. The kind that gets a generic, "We apologize for the inconvenience" response. Nothing would come of it. And yet, Samantha's hands were slightly unsteady as she poured a glass of champagne for another passenger. A few minutes later, as she passed through the aisle, she noticed something unsettling. Evelyn was no longer looking at her phone. She wasn't checking for messages. She wasn't reacting to anything. She just sat there, completely at ease, her fingers tapping lightly against the armrest, as if she had all the time in the world. Samantha didn't like it. She glanced at the other passengers. Had anyone else noticed the tension? No. Most were distracted, eating, drinking, talking. Except for one person. Julia. She stood near the galley, her arms crossed, her gaze steady. She knew. And Samantha knew she knew. Her throat tightened. She needed to take control again. Samantha turned sharply, gripping the edge of the galley counter. No, she wouldn't let this woman undermine her. She grabbed the in-flight tablet, quickly pulling up the passenger list. The names, seat numbers, loyalty statuses of every first-class passenger were right in front of her. Her eyes moved quickly down the list. Searching, scanning, until she found it. Evelyn Brooks. And the moment she read it, her breath caught in her throat. Her stomach plummeted. Because she knew that name. Everyone in the airline industry knew that name. Evelyn Brooks wasn't just any first-class passenger. She was the owner of the airline. Samantha's fingers tightened around the tablet. She stared at the screen, as if willing the name to change, as if willing reality to be different. But it wasn't. The woman she had refused water, the woman she had belittled, the woman she had treated like she didn't belong, was the billionaire who owned the very airline she worked for. A cold sweat formed at the back of Samantha's neck. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, each second making it worse. This wasn't just an annoying passenger who might file a complaint. This was the single worst person she could have mistreated. Her mind scrambled for a way out. Damage control. Maybe Evelyn hadn't sent the message to the CEO. Maybe she hadn't noticed Samantha's name. Maybe there was still time to fix this. But deep down, Samantha already knew. It was too late. Samantha's fingers tightened around the serving tray as she forced herself to breathe steadily. This wasn't happening. There had to be a way to fix it. Maybe Evelyn hadn't seen her name. Maybe there was still time to smooth things over before it spiraled out of control. She inhaled sharply, forcing her expression back into its usual composed state. She was good at this. She had handled difficult passengers before. She just had to be careful. With a practiced smile, the same one she reserved for VIP passengers, she stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the cabin floor. Stopping beside Evelyn's seat, she took a deep breath. "Miss Brooks," Samantha said, her voice dripping with politeness. "I wanted to personally apologize if there was any miscommunication earlier. I'd be happy to bring you that water now." For a moment, Evelyn didn't even acknowledge her. She took her time, turning her head slowly, her expression unreadable. Samantha's pulse hammered against her ribs, but she kept the smile in place. Evelyn exhaled softly, an almost amused sound, then spoke. "No, thank you." Samantha blinked. That wasn't what she expected. Of course, but if there's anything else I can." "I think we're past that," Evelyn cut in, her tone calm but unyielding. A hush fell over the first-class cabin. Passengers who had been only half listening before were now fully engaged, their gazes subtly shifting toward the interaction. Near the galley, Julia froze in place, her hands stilling over a tray of glasses. Even those who hadn't realized something was wrong before could feel the shift in power now. Samantha's stomach twisted into a tight knot. Evelyn knew. She knew everything. Samantha opened her mouth, desperate to regain control, but before she could speak, Evelyn picked up her phone, glanced at the screen, and in one effortless motion, tapped a single button. Then she set it down. Samantha's heart nearly stopped, because she knew, without a doubt, that one tap had just sealed her fate. Her entire body went rigid. She had spent years working her way up in this airline, enforcing policies, demanding respect, making sure everyone knew who was in charge. And now, standing next to Evelyn Brooks' seat, she had never felt smaller in her life. Her mind raced. That tap on the phone. What did it mean? Was it a message? A call? Was Evelyn already speaking to someone higher up? Was this just the beginning of something worse? Samantha swallowed, struggling to keep her face neutral. She had to salvage this. Ms. Brooks, she tried again, her voice softer now, more careful. I truly didn't mean any offense earlier. It was just a misunderstanding. Evelyn's gaze flickered up to her, unimpressed. Was it? Samantha forced a small laugh, trying to lighten the tension. It sounded weak, even to her own ears. Of course, she rushed on. You know how these flights can be, so many requests coming in at once. It wasn't personal. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. Not personal? She echoed. Her voice was still calm, still controlled. She let the silence stretch just long enough for Samantha's confidence to waver. Samantha felt a pit form in her stomach. I only meant that. Let me ask you something. Evelyn interrupted smoothly, still perfectly composed. How long have you been working as a flight attendant? Samantha hesitated. The shift in conversation threw her off balance. Almost 10 years, she answered quickly. She had no idea where this was going, but for the first time since the flight started, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Evelyn was softening. Maybe she was giving her a chance. 10 years, Evelyn nodded slowly. That's a long time. You must have served thousands of passengers. Samantha straightened slightly. Yes, ma'am, she said, latching on to the opportunity. I always do my best to provide excellent service. Evelyn studied her for a long moment. Then she asked, and in those 10 years, how many first-class passengers have you denied a cup of water? The question hit like a punch to the stomach. Samantha's mouth opened. No sound came out. Her mind raced for an answer. But there was no right answer. If she admitted that she had never done it before, then she was caught. If she claimed she had done it to others, she only made herself look worse. Evelyn waited, unbothered, completely in control. Samantha forced another shaky laugh. I was just following standard beverage service. I don't lie. Evelyn said it simply. The words weren't loud, they weren't harsh, but they shut Samantha up instantly. A few seats away, a businessman who had pretended to read his magazine slowly lowered it. His eyes were now fully on the conversation. Others shifted slightly in their seats, trying not to be obvious as they listened. Samantha's hands felt clammy. Her head was spinning, desperate to find a way out. But Evelyn wasn't finished. You knew I belonged in this seat, Evelyn continued. You saw my boarding pass. You knew I was in first class, yet you looked at me and decided I wasn't worthy of a cup of water. She let that sink in before adding, Tell me, was that in the training manual? Samantha's entire body tensed. Her throat was dry. She knew everyone was watching now. Her voice barely above a whisper, she forced out, No, ma'am. Evelyn gave a small nod. That's what I thought. The air in first class felt heavier now. The kind of silence that meant something was about to happen. The tension had shifted entirely. Samantha had walked into this thinking she had all the power, and now she stood there, completely exposed. Then, Evelyn did something she wasn't expecting. She picked up her phone again. This time, she didn't just tap the screen. She held it to her ear and spoke. Tell the captain I'd like to have a word. Samantha's stomach dropped. She barely registered the shocked expressions on the passengers around her, barely noticed Julia's wide eyes from across the cabin. All she could focus on was the rising panic inside her. The captain. Samantha's mouth went dry. If the captain was getting involved, this wasn't just a complaint anymore. This was serious. She stepped back instinctively, her heart pounding. "Ms. Brooks?" Evelyn set the phone down. Her expression never changed. "You should get back to work, Samantha." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a dismissal. And for the first time in her entire career, Samantha had no choice but to listen. Samantha gripped the counter in the galley, her knuckles turning white as the weight of what had just happened sank in. She had spent years on flights like this, commanding the cabin, enforcing the rules, deciding who deserved extra courtesy and who didn't. But for the first time, she felt something unfamiliar. Panic. Julia stood a few feet away, arms folded, watching her carefully. She didn't say anything at first, but her expression said everything. Samantha turned to her sharply. You saw what just happened, right?" Julia hesitated. Then finally she nodded. "I saw you deny a first-class passenger a cup of water." Samantha's jaw clenched. "I wasn't denying her anything. I was just—" She cut herself off, because for the first time she realized she had no real excuse. Julia tilted her head, waiting for her to finish a sentence she never could. After a long pause, she sighed. "Samantha? Do you even know who she is?" Samantha swallowed hard, her chest tightening. She knew now. She had known the moment she saw Evelyn Brooks' name on the passenger list. But saying it out loud, admitting it to Julia, that would make it real. Julia shook her head. "Look, I don't know exactly what's about to happen, but if I were you, I'd start thinking about what you're going to say to the captain." Samantha flinched. The captain. The thought made her stomach churn. But before she could respond, the intercom clicked on. "Samantha Hayes, report to the cockpit immediately." Everything stopped. The galley, the first-class cabin, even the distant murmuring from economy. All of it faded, except for those words. Julia's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The damage was already done. Samantha took a slow step forward, suddenly hyper-aware of the weight of every passenger's gaze. The businessman who had been eavesdropping earlier, he wasn't even pretending anymore. A woman across the aisle whispered something to her seatmate, both of them stealing glances at Samantha as she passed. Even the passengers who had ignored the earlier tension were watching now. The walk to the cockpit felt like a lifetime. She reached the door, pressed the call button, and after a few seconds, it unlocked with a small beep. With a deep breath, she stepped inside, and immediately, the atmosphere shifted. Captain Daniel Whitmore sat in his chair, his posture stiff, his expression unreadable. The co-pilot, Ryan Carter, barely looked at her before turning his attention back to the controls. But the real problem wasn't them. Samantha's throat tightened as she noticed the man standing in the small space between the cockpit seats. Marcus Langley, the airline's flight supervisor. He was never on these flights. He only got involved when there was a serious issue. And now, he was here, waiting for her. Marcus looked at her, his expression cold. "Sit down, Samantha." She hesitated for only a second before lowering herself into the small jump seat by the cockpit door. She had been in this seat before, but never like this, never as the one being questioned. Captain Whitmore exhaled through his nose before finally turning his chair to face her. "Would you like to explain why I just received a call from Evelyn Brooks?" Samantha's hands clenched in her lap. "Captain, Marcus held up a hand, cutting her off. "Before you try to spin this," he said, his voice sharp, "let me remind you, I already know everything." His gaze hardened. "So choose your words carefully." The silence in the cockpit was suffocating. The only sound was the low hum of the aircraft, the occasional click of buttons as Ryan adjusted the flight settings. Samantha tried to steady her breathing. There had to be a way out of this. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "I didn't know who she was." Marcus's jaw tightened. "That doesn't make this better." Samantha shook her head quickly. I was just following the service guidelines. I wasn't trying to be disrespectful." Marcus let out a slow, measured breath. "Tell me exactly what happened." Samantha hesitated, glancing at Captain Whitmore, but his expression gave nothing away. He was waiting. She swallowed hard. She asked for water. The word sounded so insignificant now, so utterly pathetic. "I told her that first-class beverages are limited to what's on the menu, and She asked for water," Marcus repeated, his voice sharper now. "Not wine, not an expensive cocktail, just water." Samantha flinched. Marcus folded his arms. "And let me guess, you had no problem serving the other first-class passengers?" Her pulse pounded in her ears. I didn't think. That much is clear, Marcus interrupted. Captain Whitmore finally leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. Samantha, do you understand what's happening right now? His tone wasn't angry. It was worse. It was disappointed. Samantha stayed silent. Marcus sighed. We're 30,000 feet in the air, so I can't remove you from the flight right now. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. But the moment we land, you are to report directly to airline administration. The blood drained from Samantha's face. Her fingers dug into her lap. Wait, this isn't a warning? Marcus shook his head. This isn't a suspension. He met her eyes. It's already been decided. Samantha's breathing grew shallow. Decided? Captain Whitmore's next words shattered everything. Evelyn Brooks owns this airline, he said simply, and she just made it clear. You no longer work here. Samantha's stomach dropped. The cockpit suddenly felt too small, too suffocating. Her mind struggled to process what she had just heard. No longer work here. The words rang in her ears, louder than the steady hum of the engines, louder than the soft crackle of the radio. She had always believed she was untouchable. Her seniority, her experience, her control over the cabin. She had built her entire career on those things. But now, none of it mattered. Marcus was still watching her, his expression unreadable. Captain Whitmore had already turned back toward the flight controls, as if the conversation was over. Samantha swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak. This isn't fair. Marcus arched an eyebrow. Not fair? He leaned forward slightly. You denied a first-class passenger the most basic request on a flight, a glass of water. Then you spoke down to her like she didn't belong. And now you're telling me it's not fair? Samantha had no response to that. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. And for the first time in her life, Samantha Hayes had no control. Samantha stared at the piece of paper in her trembling hands. The words were simple. Crew jump seat, back of the plane. But the meaning behind them? Devastating. Marcus folded his arms across his chest. You're done serving passengers. You'll spend the rest of this flight in the crew section, away from first class. His voice was cold, final. When we land, you'll be escorted directly off the plane. No crew debriefing, no explanations. Evelyn Brooks doesn't want to see you anywhere near her. Samantha's chest tightened. This was real. Her mind scrambled for a way out, some argument that would make Marcus change his mind. But before she could get a single word out, Captain Whitmore spoke again. If you refuse to move, we have an air marshal on board, he said, not even bothering to look at her. I'd suggest you take the seat voluntarily. Samantha's entire body went cold. She had always been the one giving orders. Now she was the one being ordered. With no other choice, she rose unsteadily from the jump seat. Her legs felt weak beneath her as she stepped toward the cockpit door. She could feel Marcus's eyes on her. He didn't say another word. He didn't need to. The damage was already done. The moment she stepped back into first class, she felt it. The weight of every passenger's gaze turning toward her. She didn't need to look up to know. They were all watching. They had heard the intercom call. They had seen the tense conversation earlier. And now they were witnessing her walk back down the aisle, like someone on a walk of shame. She didn't meet their eyes. Her face burned with humiliation as she moved past row after row, past businessmen sipping their expensive cocktails, past women whispering behind manicured hands, past the very passengers she once believed were beneath her notice. And then she passed seat 1A. Evelyn Brooks didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She sat exactly as she had before, calm, composed, her fingers lightly resting on her phone. There was no smugness in her expression, no gloating, no satisfaction, just certainty. She had seen this before, handled people like Samantha before, and she had done it without ever raising her voice. Samantha's hands trembled as she walked past her former kingdom, past the first-class section she had ruled over for years, past the luxury she had taken for granted. She stepped through the curtain, separating first class from the rest of the plane, and that was when it hit her, the reality of it. She wasn't a respected senior flight attendant anymore. She wasn't in control of anything. She was just another disgraced crew member, sitting in the back, waiting for the flight to end. Samantha sank into the crew jump seat at the rear of the plane. Her uniform, once crisp and professional, felt suffocating now. The fabric clung too tightly around her throat, like it was strangling her. She barely noticed the other flight attendants moving past her, setting up the final service preparations. No one spoke to her. No one even looked at her. She curled her fingers into fists, her nails digging into her palms. This couldn't be happening. For 10 years, she had been the one in charge, the one enforcing the rules, the one deciding who got the extra perks, who got the warmest greetings, and who got the bare minimum. She had worked her way up, flight after flight, through difficult passengers, long hours, and endless regulations. And now, all of it was gone. Not because of some huge mistake, not because she had endangered the flight, because of water. She exhaled shakily, staring straight ahead at the galley wall in front of her. The humiliation of walking through first class still burned in her chest. She had heard the whispers. The passengers hadn't even tried to hide it. Some whispered behind their hands. Others didn't bother. They just watched. She clenched her teeth. This wasn't just a punishment. This was a public execution. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone. There had to be a way to fix this. A union representative, someone in HR, maybe even a lawyer. Someone had to help her. She unlocked the screen, and her blood ran cold. A notification sat at the top of the screen. Your employee access has been restricted. Her stomach dropped. She tried to open the airline's internal system, the one she had used for years to check flight schedules, communicate with supervisors, and report incidents. The screen flashed red. Error, invalid login. Her breathing grew uneven. She tried again. Error, account not found. Her mouth went dry. They weren't just preparing to fire her. She was already gone. They had locked her out before she even stepped off the plane. Her heart pounded in her ears as she switched to her messages, frantically scrolling through her contacts. Someone. Anyone. She tapped the name of her closest contact in crew management. The phone rang once, twice, then straight to voicemail. She tried another name. Voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. Her stomach twisted into knots. Had the news already spread? Had she been completely shut out? A sudden ding pulled her attention back to the screen. A new message. Her breath hitched. She opened it, hoping for an answer, a lifeline. But when she saw the sender, her heart sank. It wasn't from crew management. It wasn't from HR. It was from a former colleague. Someone she had worked with years ago. Someone who had left the airline after being pushed out in a similar way. The message was only 3 words. You're done, Samantha. Her pulse pounded. Her hands went limp, the phone slipping slightly from her grasp. This wasn't just a termination. This was an erasure. The airline wasn't just firing her. They were making sure she could never work in the industry again. And the worst part? She knew exactly who was behind it. Evelyn Brooks hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't argued. She hadn't demanded a scene. She had sent one single message. And now, before the plane had even landed, Samantha Hayes' career was gone. She pressed a shaky hand to her forehead, nausea rising in her stomach. Everything she had built, everything she had worked for, everything she had taken pride in, gone, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Samantha sat in the cramped crew jump seat, her fingers gripping her phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. There had to be a way out. Her mind raced as she typed furiously, sending messages to the few people she thought she could still rely on. Samantha? Hey, I need to talk. Something's happening. Call me as soon as you can. She stared at the screen, willing it to light with a reply. Nothing. She tried again. This time, she reached out to a manager she had met at a corporate seminar the year before. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Can you check what's going on with my access? I'm locked out of the system. She hit send, then another message, then another. Her breath came faster, uneven. Someone had to answer. Someone had to tell her this wasn't real. Someone had to fix this before it was too late. But as the minutes ticked by, the realization hit her like a brick wall. There were no replies, no calls, no reassurance that this was just a mistake. Only silence. Samantha's throat tightened. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe evenly. This wasn't over. She wouldn't let it be over. A sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Excuse me. Samantha looked up, her nerves already raw. A younger flight attendant stood in front of her, one of the junior crew members from the economy section. What? Samantha snapped. The attendant hesitated before shifting awkwardly. We need the space back here for meal service. Captain said you need to stay seated and out of the way." Samantha's jaw clenched. They were treating her like nothing, like she was a problem that needed to be contained. But she didn't argue. She just nodded stiffly and turned toward the back wall, pretending not to hear the clatter of trays being set up just a few feet away. The other flight attendants whispered as they worked, their voices low but unmistakable. Samantha didn't have to strain to know what they were saying. They knew. They all knew. Every now and then, she felt their eyes on her, some filled with quiet satisfaction, others with thinly veiled pity. And that was the worst part. She didn't want their pity. For years, she had walked through first class with her head high, making sure everyone respected her authority. She had built a reputation for being sharp, precise, always in control. But now she was sitting in the back of the plane, powerless, a nobody. Samantha stared down at her phone, willing it to light up. Just one response, one call, one sign that she still mattered. But the screen remained dark. Then, a different sound filled the cabin. The soft chime of the intercom. "This is your captain speaking." Captain Whitmore's voice was steady, professional. "We'll be starting our descent shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and flight attendants prepare the cabin for landing." Samantha barely heard the rest. Her mind was locked on a single horrifying thought. Landing. She was running out of time. The moment the wheels touched the ground, she would be escorted off the plane. She wouldn't get to walk off like a normal crew member. She would be removed. And then what? Would security be waiting for her? Would she be handed a termination letter right there in the terminal? Would she even be allowed to speak to someone before they erased her from the airline completely? Panic clawed at her ribs. She had to do something. Now, her eyes darted toward first class. Evelyn Brooks was still there. If anyone could stop this, if anyone had the power to fix this, it was her. Samantha didn't hesitate. She pushed herself up from the seat, her legs weak but determined. She ignored the glances from the other flight attendants as she marched toward the front of the plane. She didn't know exactly what she was going to say, but she knew one thing for sure. She had to beg. Each step felt heavier than the last. She barely registered the plane's slight turbulence as she walked past the rows of passengers, heading straight for first class. For years, she had owned this aisle. She had walked up and down with authority, controlling the flow of service, making sure everyone knew she was in charge. Now, she felt like a stranger in her own cabin. She stepped past the partition separating economy from first class. A few passengers lifted their heads, their gazes flickering between her and seat 1A. Evelyn Brooks sat comfortably in her seat, her posture relaxed, one hand resting lightly on her phone. She wasn't watching a movie. She wasn't engaged in conversation. She was just waiting. Samantha's stomach twisted. Evelyn knew she was coming. She hesitated for half a second, but stopping now would only make things worse. She forced herself forward. When she reached Evelyn's seat, she took a shallow breath, pressing her sweaty hands against her uniform skirt to steady herself. She needed to fix this. Clearing her throat, she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Miss Brooks, may I have a moment?" Evelyn didn't look up right away. She took her time, exhaling softly before finally lifting her gaze. Her expression didn't change. No anger, no satisfaction, no irritation. Just calm, unwavering control. Samantha swallowed hard. I just wanted to apologize," she said quickly, forcing her voice to remain steady. "For earlier, I made a mistake." Evelyn blinked slowly as if giving her a chance to keep going. Samantha hesitated. Her pride screamed at her to stop, but this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about survival. She forced herself to continue. "I should have handled the situation differently. I should have given you what you asked for." She licked her dry lips, her voice growing softer. "It wasn't my place to question you." Evelyn didn't react. Samantha's heart pounded. She wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. A few rows away, Julia stood near the galley, her arms crossed tightly. The younger flight attendant wasn't saying anything, but the look on her face made it clear. She was watching every second of this. Samantha hated that. She had spent years training people like Julia, making sure they respected the rules, making sure they understood how things worked in the airline industry. And now, Julia was watching her beg for mercy. Samantha turned her attention back to Evelyn, her fingers gripping the seat in front of her as she leaned in slightly. I know why. Samantha's voice dropped lower, barely more than a whisper. I never meant for things to go this far. Evelyn tilted her head slightly, studying her. And what exactly does this far mean? Samantha flinched. She hadn't expected a response. I know you contacted the captain, she admitted, her throat tightening. I know what's happening when we land. Evelyn nodded slightly. Not a confirmation. Not a threat. Just an acknowledgement of the inevitable. Samantha's pulse spiked. She had to fix this. Now. Her voice dropped even lower, thick with desperation. Please, she whispered. I've worked for this airline for 10 years. I made one mistake. I don't deserve to have my entire career destroyed over this. Evelyn didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't move. Samantha felt herself unraveling. She couldn't read Evelyn at all. Was she considering the apology? Was she ignoring her? Had she already made up her mind? Samantha leaned in even further, lowering her voice to an almost pleading murmur. If you can just speak to the captain, she said quickly. Maybe he can reconsider. Maybe we can fix this before we land, before things become permanent. For the first time, Evelyn's lips curved slightly. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't cruel either. It was just knowing. Samantha's throat tightened. Evelyn inhaled softly, glancing down at her phone. For a moment, Samantha's heart leapt into her throat. Was she about to send a message? Was she stopping this? But then, Evelyn set her phone down again and met her eyes. Why should I? Samantha's stomach dropped. I just told you. This is my career, my life. Her voice was openly desperate now. I know I messed up. I know I shouldn't have treated you like that. But I'm willing to make it right. Evelyn's expression didn't change. Make it right, she repeated, almost to herself. Then she studied Samantha for a long, agonizing moment before asking, Tell me, Samantha, if I wasn't who I am, would you be trying to make it right now? Samantha froze. A fresh wave of nausea hit her like a punch to the gut, because the answer was no. If Evelyn Brooks had been anyone else, just another businesswoman, just another well-dressed first-class passenger, Samantha would have doubled down. She would have refused to apologize. She would have stood by her decision. Maybe even turned it around and blamed Evelyn for being difficult. She knew that. And worse, Evelyn knew that too. Samantha opened her mouth, struggling for words. But nothing came out. Her mouth had gone completely dry. Evelyn watched her for a long, slow moment. Then, without a word, she picked up her phone and started typing. Samantha's breath caught in her throat. Was she reversing the decision? Was she telling the captain to hold off? Then, just as effortlessly, Evelyn set the phone down again and leaned back, completely at ease. I don't think you've learned anything. Her voice was calm, steady, final. Samantha felt her stomach sink into the floor. Evelyn exhaled softly, shaking her head. This isn't about your career, Samantha. This is about the way you see people. And I don't think that's going to change just because you're afraid of losing your job. Samantha felt like she had been slapped. She opened her mouth again, ready to beg, actually beg. But Evelyn had already turned away. The conversation was over. The flight attendants in the galley had heard every word. A few passengers nearby had too. Samantha's face burned as she turned sharply, walking back toward the rear of the plane. Her entire body trembled. She had done everything she could. She had swallowed her pride, apologized, practically pleaded. But none of it mattered, because Evelyn Brooks had already decided, and her decision was final. Samantha barely made it back to the crew jump seat before her legs gave out beneath her. She sank down hard, her breath coming in shallow, uneven bursts. The walls of the plane suddenly felt smaller, closing in on her, pressing against her chest. This couldn't be real. She had begged. She had put aside her pride, her authority, her years of experience. She had admitted she was wrong. And yet, Evelyn Brooks hadn't even considered giving her a second chance. The realization settled in heavier than anything she had ever felt before. Evelyn wasn't going to stop this. She was going to let it happen. Samantha dug her nails into her palms, her head spinning. She had spent a decade climbing the ranks, proving herself, controlling the first-class cabin like it was her personal kingdom. And now, she wasn't just losing her job, she was being erased. She stared down at her phone. The screen was still blank. No messages. No callbacks. No reassurances that someone was going to help her. Her hands trembled as she checked her employee account again. Still locked out. She tried logging into the airline scheduling app. Maybe she could see if her future flights had been canceled. Error. Account not found. Samantha squeezed her eyes shut, nausea crawling up her throat. They weren't just firing her. They were making sure she never worked in the airline industry again. She knew how this worked. She had seen it happen to others. Flight attendants who had been let go quietly, their records marked in a way that made them unemployable. And now, it was happening to her. Her breath hitched. Her entire life was about to change forever. The intercom chimed overhead. Captain Whitmore's voice rang through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final descent. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened, and flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing." Samantha's body stiffened. This was it. She turned, glancing toward first class one last time. Evelyn Brooks hadn't moved. She was still sitting there, perfectly composed, watching the view outside the window, as if none of this mattered. And maybe, to her, it didn't. Maybe Samantha had never mattered. A lump formed in her throat. She looked away quickly, her eyes burning. Her chest tightening with a new kind of panic, the kind that comes when you realize there is nothing left to do. The plane jolted slightly as the landing gear deployed. Passengers murmured, fastening their seatbelts. Some stretched, gathering their belongings, preparing to leave the plane. As if this were just another ordinary flight. For them, it was. For Samantha, it was the last flight of her career. Would she be escorted off the plane like a criminal? Would the airline's executives be standing there, waiting to strip her of her badge, her uniform, her title? Would security be involved? Would passengers be watching, filming? Samantha's breath quickened. She wasn't ready. But the plane didn't care. The tires touched down with a sharp jolt, the engines roaring as the aircraft slowed. A few passengers clapped lightly, a meaningless habit. Samantha barely heard it. Her entire body was frozen. The plane taxied toward the gate, and with every passing second, the weight in her chest grew heavier. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to wake up and realize this was all a nightmare. But then, ding! The seatbelt sign switched off. Passengers unbuckled, stood up, stretched, reached for their bags. Flight attendants in first class moved swiftly to open the cabin doors. Samantha stayed seated, frozen. The curtain separating first class from economy was pulled open. Footsteps approached. A familiar voice, firm, commanding, final. Samantha Hayes. Captain Whitmore stood in front of her, his expression unreadable. "It's time to go." Samantha's breath hitched. She turned her head slightly, and that's when she saw them. At the front of the plane, waiting just beyond the cabin doors, 2 airline executives, a security officer. And at the center of them all, Evelyn Brooks. Her arms crossed, her expression calm, unreadable. Waiting. Samantha's stomach dropped. The moment the passengers left the plane, she would be escorted out. There was no escape, no more chances. Her fate was sealed. Her entire body felt like lead as she sat in the crew jump seat staring straight ahead. This was it. The moment she had dreaded since Evelyn Brooks had picked up her phone mid-flight. She had been warned. She had been given chances to correct herself before this spiraled out of control, but she hadn't taken them. Instead, she had doubled down, convinced that her authority meant something, that she was untouchable. And now, she sat at the back of the plane, powerless, while the owner of the airline stood at the front, waiting to watch her be removed. She forced herself to breathe, gripping the edges of her uniform as if holding onto it could somehow stop everything from slipping away. The murmurs of passengers filled the cabin, but they barely registered in her ears. The seatbelt sign had just turned off. Yet already, people were gathering their things, shuffling into the aisles, eager to get off the plane and move on with their lives. Their lives would continue. Hers had just ended. The security officer near the exit hadn't moved yet, but he didn't need to. Samantha knew his presence was for her. She wasn't being given the option to walk off this flight with dignity. She was being escorted, just like any passenger who had broken the rules. The irony stung. She had spent years enforcing policies, escorting passengers off planes, filing complaints when someone was too difficult to handle. Now, she was one of them. The aisle was slow-moving. Passengers inched forward, adjusting coats, stretching after the long flight. Some hadn't yet realized what was happening, but others, Others were fully aware. A businessman from first class glanced over his shoulder, his eyes flickering toward her. Only for a second. Before he looked away, shaking his head. A woman in a tailored blazer whispered something to her seatmate. She subtly angled her phone away, as if trying to hide that she was recording. Samantha's breath came faster. She couldn't do this. She couldn't stand up and walk past all these people, knowing that every step was another reminder that she had fallen. But the moment she shifted in her seat, Captain Whitmore spoke again. "Now, Samantha." It wasn't a request. It was an order. Her stomach twisted violently, but she pushed herself up anyway. Her knees felt weak beneath her. Julia stood in the galley, her lips pressed together, eyes downcast. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't enjoying this. But she also wasn't stepping in to help. And Samantha wasn't sure which was worse. She swallowed, lifting her chin, trying to mask the fear with pride. But as she took the first step down the aisle, she felt it. The weight of dozens of eyes following her. Passengers shifted slightly to the side, making space, not out of respect, but because they knew what was happening. They had seen this before, but never with a flight attendant. A man who had been quiet the entire flight muttered under his breath, just loud enough for her to hear, "Guess we know who wasn't supposed to be here after all." Her chest burned, but she kept moving, her pulse hammering in her ears. Each step felt like a mile. The walls of the plane felt too small, the space too suffocating. Then she reached first class. She had to pass Evelyn Brooks. Her breath hitched. Evelyn sat exactly where she had been the whole flight, perfectly composed. Her expression was neutral, not triumphant, not smug, just unbothered. She had already moved on. Samantha forced herself to keep walking, refusing to look at her. But just as she passed, Evelyn finally spoke. Her voice was calm, controlled, deadly. "Do you still think I don't belong here?" Samantha's breath stopped, her steps faltered, but she forced herself to keep moving. She couldn't answer that. Not now. She had lost the right to answer that. She reached the jet bridge and felt the sudden rush of cool airport air hit her skin. For a moment, she thought she could breathe again. Then she saw them. A group of airline executives stood near the terminal gate, dressed in sharp suits, waiting, like a board of executioners. A single table had been set up near the entrance, a place for her to turn in her badge, her uniform, her access. And standing at the center of them, arms crossed, Marcus Langley. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't pleased with what had happened. But he was here to finish it. A security officer followed behind her, ensuring she didn't turn back. Samantha's throat tightened as she stepped toward the table. Her legs moved on autopilot. She wanted to scream. She wanted to argue. She wanted to turn back time. Undo this moment. Make a different choice. But it was too late. Her career had already crashed, and she was the one who had sent it into freefall. The airport terminal felt like an entirely different world compared to the plane. The warm, dim glow of the cabin was gone, replaced by the bright, sterile fluorescence of the airport. Everything felt too open, too exposed. There was nowhere to hide. A group of airline executives stood near the table. They weren't speaking, but they didn't need to. Their presence alone sent a clear message. This wasn't a discussion. This was a termination. At the center of them, his hands resting on the table, stood Marcus Langley. His expression was unreadable. His mouth set in a firm, professional line. Samantha had seen many terminations in her career. But this wasn't just any firing. This was an example, a warning to every crew member in the airline. Mess up badly enough, disrespect the wrong person, and you wouldn't just lose your job. You'd lose your entire career. Samantha's throat was dry. Her heart pounded so loudly in her ears that she barely noticed the low murmur of airport noise. Passengers from the flight were already filtering through the terminal, some glancing over as they passed. Some of them knew exactly what was happening. Others just saw a humiliated flight attendant standing at a table, surrounded by executives, like a disciplinary panel waiting for the final verdict. Either way, she was being seen. She stopped in front of the table. Her hands clenched so tightly into fists that her nails dug into her palms. Marcus sighed. Then, without hesitation, he lifted a single sheet of paper from the table. "Samantha Hayes," he said, his voice even. "Professional, detached, effective immediately. Your employment with this airline is terminated." The words hit like a slap to the face. She had already known it was coming. She had known from the moment Evelyn Brooks had turned her down in first class. From the moment Captain Whitmore called her to the cockpit. From the moment she was escorted off the plane like a disgraced passenger. But hearing it out loud, hearing it made it real. She forced herself to swallow, but her throat felt raw. Marcus pushed the paper forward. "This is your official termination notice," he said. "It includes documentation of the incident and details regarding the formal complaints filed." Samantha's stomach twisted. Complaints. Plural. That meant Evelyn hadn't been the only one. Passengers had complained. Maybe even Julia had reported what happened. She was cornered. With stiff fingers, she reached out, taking the paper, even though she couldn't bring herself to look at it. Marcus lifted a second item from the table, a small black company badge, her employee ID, her name still on it, her photo laminated behind a thin layer of plastic. She had worn that badge for 10 years. Marcus held it between two fingers, his gaze steady. "Hand over your credentials." Samantha hesitated. Her badge was clipped to the waistband of her uniform, the familiar weight of it pressing against her hip like it always had. A small, insignificant thing. And yet it was the symbol of everything she had worked for. Her identity as a flight attendant, her status, her authority. She reached for it slowly, her fingers trembling. The clip resisted for just a second before sliding free. And in that moment, the moment it left her uniform, she felt naked, stripped of everything. She placed the badge in Marcus's outstretched hand. He didn't hesitate. He set it down on the table. Like it was nothing. Like she was nothing. Samantha's face burned with shame. Marcus exhaled through his nose, moving to the next part of the process. "Your access to airline property has been revoked," he said. "You are no longer permitted in employee-only areas, including crew lounges and back offices." Samantha's jaw clenched. He wasn't just firing her. He was banning her from returning. Her hands shook as she tried to keep herself composed. Marcus nodded toward another executive. A woman in a dark suit. She stepped forward, holding a tablet. "Per our policy, your dismissal is being logged in the airline employment database." She tapped a few things on the screen. "Future employment references will reflect your termination for misconduct." Samantha felt her stomach drop. Her hands turned to ice. This wasn't just a firing. This was career destruction. Every major airline shared records. The moment she was logged as terminated for misconduct, she wouldn't be able to get another job, not with any airline. Her breath came too fast. Wait. She barely recognized her own voice. A whisper. A plea. Marcus met her gaze. His expression was hard. Samantha shook her head, panic creeping into her voice. "You don't have to put it like that," she rushed out. "You can just say I resigned. Just say it was a misunderstanding." Marcus didn't flinch. "That's not how this works." Samantha's chest tightened. "Please," she breathed. "I'll never work here again. I'll never step foot on airline property again. Just don't put it in the record like that." Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then finally, he said the last thing she ever wanted to hear. "That decision has already been made." Samantha's world caved in. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, watching everything she had built, everything she had been, get swept away into the ocean below. She knew it then. This wasn't just one job, this was her entire career. Gone. Marcus straightened, adjusting his cuffs. "You are now officially dismissed." The finality of it hit her like a brick. No warnings, no appeals, no coming back. She had never felt so small in her life. Marcus nodded toward the security officer standing behind her. "Escort her out." Samantha's heart stopped. She turned sharply. "That's not necessary," she said quickly, her voice shaking. I can leave on my own." Marcus's expression didn't change. "You can walk, or he can walk with you." Samantha's throat closed. She turned slowly, humiliation pressing down on her like a crushing weight. The officer stepped slightly closer, not aggressively, not forcefully, but present, waiting. Samantha clenched her teeth. She wanted to scream, to fight, to demand that this wasn't fair, but she knew it wouldn't matter. So she did the only thing she could. She turned, and she walked away. The cold evening air hit her face like a slap. The sudden change in temperature sent a shiver through her. But she barely felt it. Her body was numb. She kept walking. Her shoes clicked against the pavement of the arrivals area, past the endless line of waiting taxis, past travelers pulling their suitcases behind them. past families hugging their loved ones after long flights. No one was waiting for her. No one knew. No one cared that she had just lost everything. She walked until she reached an empty bench near the pickup zone. Then, she sat down heavily, dropping her bag at her feet. Her hands were still trembling, her breathing uneven. It was over. Not just the job, not just this one flight, her entire career. She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving on autopilot. She checked her messages again, still hoping, someone, anyone, a reply, a callback, something to tell her this was just a mistake. But her inbox was empty. Her so-called friends in the airline industry had already distanced themselves. No one wanted to be associated with a flight attendant, fired by the owner of the airline. Her employee login was still locked. Her name was already wiped from the internal system. It was as if she had never worked there at all. A fresh wave of nausea hit her. She pressed a shaking hand to her forehead. What was she supposed to do now? Her entire life had been built around her career. The early morning flights, the long layovers in different cities, the perfectly tailored uniform that made her feel like she was somebody. She had spent years walking through airport terminals with her head high, knowing that she belonged, knowing that she had earned her place among the elite flight crews. And now, she wasn't even allowed in the crew lounge. She was nobody. Samantha's fingers curled into fists. Anger fought its way past the humiliation. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had worked too hard for this. She wasn't a bad flight attendant. She knew the rules. She followed protocol. She had seniority. She had power. She had respect. But as soon as she had looked at Evelyn Brooks and assumed she wasn't worthy of first-class treatment, she had made the biggest mistake of her life. The irony burned. She had spent years deciding who got to feel important, who got the extra attention, who got the warm greetings, the special treatment, the unspoken privileges that came with being somebody on her flights. And in the end, she was the one who wasn't important. A gust of wind blew through the terminal. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. Her uniform suddenly felt like a costume. She looked down at her phone again, staring at the blank screen, at the reflection of her own face in the dim glow. And for the first time, she realized something. This wasn't just about a cup of water. It had never been about water. It was about the way she saw people. She had looked at Evelyn Brooks and made an assumption. She had decided, without thinking, that this woman wasn't worthy of the same courtesy she gave others in first class. And she had done it without hesitation. She had assumed Evelyn didn't belong. But she was the one who didn't belong. Her throat tightened, but she blinked hard, forcing back the lump rising in her chest. None of that mattered now. There were no do-overs, no second chances. Evelyn Brooks hadn't argued. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't threatened her. She had simply let the world do what it always does. She had let consequences happen. Samantha sat there for a long time, the sounds of the airport fading into the background. She knew she had nowhere to go, no job to wake up for, no flights to prepare for, just a long, empty future. With a shaky breath, she reached for her bag, pulled it onto her lap. The fabric was worn at the edges from years of travel. The airline's logo was stitched neatly onto the front. She traced the letters with her fingertips, and then, for the first time since the flight, she let herself cry. That's the end of the story. What do you think? Did she deserve what happened? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Top of form, bottom of form.